He drove a school bus for 36 years and honestly believed that if you worked hard, saved what you could, and stayed out of trouble, the system would eventually treat you fairly. Then, one quiet afternoon in early April, sitting across from his accountant during what was supposed to be a routine tax review, he heard a sentence that changed the way he looked at retirement.
Tom, the brackets increased this year, but your income rose faster than the adjustment. You're over the line now.
Now look, I've been around Medicare and Social Security cases for 40 years. 40 years. And I can tell you something that still bothers me. The people who get blindsided are very often not the reckless ones. They're the careful ones, the ones who packed lunches, drove older cars, delayed vacations, worked overtime when they didn't want to, and put money away month after month because somebody told them that's what responsible people do. Thomas Whitaker, or Tommy as most called him, was one of those people. Different people. Same kind of problem, same kind of surprise. 66 years old, retired school bus driver from Columbus, Ohio, married, grandfather of 3, the kind of man who could tell you exactly how many miles were on every bus he drove during his last decade before retirement. The kind of man who still folded receipts before putting them into envelopes. And maybe this is where I pause for a second. Because if you're around 66 and you've spent most of your life living carefully instead of loudly, this story might feel familiar. Tommy had already built a picture in his head of retirement. Nothing extravagant, not even close. Just more time with his wife, a few trips, more weekends with the grandkids. Maybe finally driving somewhere because he wanted to instead of because a route sheet told him where to go. That's all. And then the numbers showed up. Not as a disaster, not as a catastrophe. Something slower, something quieter, the kind of thing that subtracts. A little here, a little there. Until one day you realize the retirement you imagined has gotten smaller. I saw this more times than I'm comfortable admitting. And honestly, it still bothers me. Tommy's annual tax review had always followed the same ritual. Same thick manila folder. Same stack of returns going back years. Same old calculator he'd carried in his work bag for decades, its corners worn soft from thousands of days on the road. The accountant slid a page across the desk. Adjusted gross income, Medicare premium impact, projected costs, nothing dramatic, just numbers. Tommy nodded politely, then took the papers home. Then took them back out again, then checked them one more time, because he thought there had to be a mistake. There usually wasn't. I remember a factory worker years ago. Good man. Spent 2 weeks trying to prove a number was wrong. The number wasn't wrong. His expectations were. And that's harder. Much harder. A few hours later, Tommy finished helping a former co-worker with something at the depot. Most of the buses were already parked. The evening had settled over the lot. Yellow buses lined up under pale parking lot lights, engines cooling, metal ticking softly. The air carrying that familiar mix of rubber, dust, and old vinyl seats. I'm going to direct this carefully because this moment matters. People assume realization arrives like a lightning strike. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time it arrives as arithmetic, slow arithmetic. I watched this unfold in real time through stories exactly like Tommy's. A man sits down, opens a folder, pulls out a calculator he's trusted longer than some friendships, and suddenly numbers start arguing with assumptions. I remember one bus mechanic who told me the worst financial surprises aren't the big ones. The worst ones are the ones that make sense after you finally understand them. Stay with me, because before Tommy says a word, I want you to picture the scene. Empty route sheets tucked away, interior lights humming overhead, dust floating through the pale glow, the driver's seat where he'd spent thousands of mornings, the old manila folder resting against the steering wheel, the calculator balanced on one knee. Outside, rows of parked buses, standing silent like the day had already moved on without him. And inside that quiet bus, Tommy started punching numbers. Again, and again, and again. Hold on, don't look at Tommy yet. Look at the calculator first. Because that's where the argument really started. Not between Tommy and Medicare, between Tommy and the numbers. He ran a thumb across the soft corner of the folder before reaching for the calculator. The display kept giving him the same answer.
I remember staring through the windshield at an empty parking lot and thinking, I spent my whole life trying not to be a burden to anybody. How did following the rules turn into another bill?
I let that sit for a second, because that's not outrage, that's disappointment. Different thing entirely. The buses outside weren't moving, neither was Tommy. The calculator clicked, the numbers stayed the same, and the reality was simple. The 2026 IRMAA thresholds had increased. IRMAA, or Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount, is an extra surcharge the government adds to your Medicare premiums if your income from 2 years prior goes over a certain limit. But Tommy's income sources had risen faster than the annual adjustment, and that small gap was enough to move him over the line. His pension, his early Social Security benefit, several larger withdrawals from a retirement account during his first years of retirement. Together, they pushed his modified adjusted gross income, which is basically your total taxable income plus certain tax-exempt interests, just over the threshold. Not by much, just enough to add roughly $4,200 to $5,100 a year in combined Medicare Part B and Part D premiums. Enough to cancel plans, enough to force choices. If you thought inflation would naturally help you stay in a lower bracket, you're not alone. Tommy certainly thought so. Truth is, Tommy made one mistake. He watched the account balance. He never watched the threshold. And those are not the same thing. Weeks passed, not many, just enough. The kind of weeks where somebody keeps rechecking the same math hoping the answer changes. It never does. His wife started noticing, not because he talked about it. Tommy wasn't much of a talker. She noticed because he kept leaving the folder out. Kitchen table, counter, chair beside the television, then putting it away again, then taking it back out. A habit, a worry loop. We've all got one. Mine used to be checking case files twice before I went home. Old habits die hard. One evening they were discussing summer plans. Nothing fancy, just Florida. A week, grandkids, beach, breakfasts together. The things retirement brochures never mention because they're too ordinary. And that's when reality started attaching itself to actual sacrifices. The Florida trip got delayed, then reconsidered, then quietly canceled. No announcement, no argument, just subtraction. Again, a little here, a little there. A dream trimmed at the edges. A few days later, Tommy found himself back at the depot. Shift change, drivers coming and going, coffee brewing somewhere nearby. Doors opening, closing, voices bouncing off cinder-block walls. Different place, different mood, same folder, same calculator. And before I let Tommy speak again, I want to frame this carefully, because this is where disappointment gets heavy. Not dramatic, heavy. There's a difference. I watched thousands of people arrive at this stage. The anger usually fades first, then comes analysis. But between those two stages, there's a stretch of road most people never talk about. Silence. Just silence. You stop arguing with the numbers. You stop hoping they're wrong, and you simply sit with them. I remember a warehouse supervisor once sitting across from me with a coffee cup he'd forgotten to drink. 45 minutes. Never touched it. Sometimes that's what acceptance looks like. Not tears, not yelling, just stillness. And if you're somebody who spent decades believing responsible behavior automatically led to fair outcomes, that stillness can feel surprisingly lonely. So picture Tommy now, long table in the driver break room, coffee rings dried into the surface, route sheets scattered around, fluorescent lights humming overhead, buses outside warming up for afternoon runs, a low mechanical rumble vibrating through the walls, his calculator sitting beside the folder, untouched. For the first time,
The calculator stayed exactly where I put it. 5 minutes, maybe longer. I just stared at the same column of numbers. The Florida trip was gone, and what bothered me wasn't the money. It was realizing how many years I'd spent believing careful planning guaranteed a fair result.
a bus door slammed somewhere outside. Tommy didn't even look up. Then he heard a chair scrape across the floor. His wife had come by to pick him up after a retirement association meeting. She looked at the papers, looked at him, then slowly set her hand on the table.
I guess we'll see the grandkids another time?
That line stayed with him, and honestly, it stayed with me too, because she didn't say it with anger, didn't say it with blame, just tired acceptance, the kind married couples develop after decades of weathering things together. I watched this unfold more times than I wish I had. Small hopes rarely disappear all at once. They fade in pieces. One postponed trip, one delayed visit, one practical decision after another. And Tommy was beginning to understand something that would eventually change the way he managed retirement forever. The issue wasn't only the premium increase. The issue was that he had never been taught to watch the threshold itself. Nobody had told him the line mattered almost as much as the income. Nobody had told him retirement planning wasn't finished after retirement. And that's where the story turns. Because a few days later, somebody mentioned a local SHIP counselor. That stands for State Health Insurance Assistance Program, a free counseling service to help people navigate Medicare. It was just a conversation. Nothing guaranteed, nothing magical. Not every case works out. Not every review changes anything. But Tommy took the name, folded the paper, slipped it inside the old manila folder, and for the first time since that tax review, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Not relief. Not yet. Just a question. A question that made him open the calculator again. And when he finally sat down across from that counselor and spread those papers across a diner booth table, he discovered something hidden inside the numbers that nobody had explained to him before. Something that might still change the entire outcome. Have you ever discovered that the real problem wasn't the money itself, but the fact that nobody showed you where the line actually was? The next part of Tommy Whitaker's story happened the way a lot of real solutions happen. Quietly. No dramatic breakthrough. No government letter suddenly fixing everything. No miracle. Just a booth in a local diner, a stack of papers, and a tired retired bus driver willing to learn something new. I'm going to direct this carefully because this is where people often expect a heroic turnaround. That isn't what happened. What happened was slower, more practical, and honestly, more useful. The diner sat about 15 minutes from Tommy's house. Nothing special. Brown vinyl booths, coffee that somehow tasted exactly the same every year. A faint smell of bacon grease, lingering from breakfast even though it was nearly lunchtime. The windows carried fingerprints from years of customers pushing them open during warmer months. Outside, traffic drifted past. Inside, cups clinked against saucers. A waitress topped off coffee without asking, and Tommy spread the contents of that thick manila folder across the table. Different place, different purpose. The same folder, the same calculator. But for the first time, somebody was helping him understand the road ahead instead of explaining the damage already done. I watched this unfold in real time through hundreds of cases, and I want to slow down here, really slow down, because this was the moment where Tommy stopped asking, "Why did this happen?" and started asking, "What can I do now?" That's a powerful shift. Not exciting. Powerful. There's a difference. I remember a retired machinist who sat across from me years ago, spent an hour talking about what should have happened, then spent 10 minutes talking about what could happen next. Those last 10 minutes changed more than the first hour ever did. If you're somewhere around retirement age and you've spent years doing your best to stay organized, this next part may feel familiar. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't learning new information. It's accepting that the old information isn't enough anymore. The SHIP counselor didn't promise anything. Good counselors don't. She explained that Medicare IRMAA calculations look back. She explained income timing, withdrawal timing, future projections, legitimate life-changing event provisions. And she explained something Tommy had never really considered. Crossing a line by a small amount could create a much bigger cost than he expected. The line mattered. The timing mattered. The sequence mattered. Every dollar suddenly had context. And Tommy listened. Really listened.
The counselor moved papers around the table while my coffee got cold. I kept looking at the calculator, then at the numbers, then back at her notes. And something finally clicked. For weeks, I'd been staring at the wrong question. I kept asking why the line moved, why the rules felt different, why retirement suddenly cost more than I expected. Then I looked down at that calculator and thought, Tom, you've spent 36 years figuring out routes. Maybe it's time to stop arguing with the road and start figuring out the map. That was the first day I started looking for a way through instead of a reason why.
I let that sit for a second, because Tommy had finally found the right question. And once that happened, the numbers stopped feeling like a punishment and started feeling like a problem he could actually work on. A lot of people underestimate the value of understanding. I don't. 40 years taught me better. The counselor explained that retirement can qualify as a life-changing event under certain Medicare IRMAA rules if the documentation supports it. She even warned him that not every SSA 44 review succeeds. The SSA 44 is the official form you use to ask the government to lower your IRMAA surcharge because you had a major life-changing event, like stopping work or reducing hours. Some succeed, some don't. The paperwork still has to support the claim. Procedures mattered, and not every request succeeds. I want to be very clear about that. Not every case gets approved. Not every review changes the outcome. But in Tommy's situation, proper retirement documentation combined with lower ongoing income projections created a path worth pursuing. Worth pursuing. Not guaranteed. That's real life. Paperwork followed. Forms followed. Questions followed. Weeks followed. I wish I could tell you everything moved quickly. It didn't. Government systems rarely sprint. They walk. Sometimes they limp. Tommy gathered records, retirement documents, income estimates, records of retirement account withdrawals, pension statements, Social Security estimates, benefit statements, tax information. And through all of it, he kept returning to the habit he'd built over 3 decades behind a school bus steering wheel. Checklists, route planning, verification, one line at a time, one stop at a time, one decision at a time. And that's where the story started changing. Not because the system became fair, because Tommy became more precise. That's an important distinction. I watched this happen over and over. The people who survived complicated retirement rules weren't necessarily smarter. They became better observers. They learned where the signs were posted, and Tommy was becoming an observer, a very good one. Now here's the part he only understood weeks later. And honestly, this is where the story hit me hardest, because it wasn't really about Medicare anymore. It was about trust. Trust in systems, trust in expectations, trust in promises people quietly build their lives around. For years, Tommy believed hard work created predictable outcomes. Most of us do. Then retirement arrived and introduced variables nobody had mentioned. Thresholds, brackets, premium adjustments, income timing. The rules hadn't exactly changed, but the way they affected him suddenly had. And if you're around 66 and you've spent decades assuming responsible behavior automatically protects you from unpleasant surprises, you're not alone. I saw this more times than I'm comfortable admitting. One afternoon, Tommy received another update regarding his review process. Not final, not complete. Just another step, another request, another document. And instead of getting frustrated, he did something interesting. He opened a notebook, started projecting future income. Quarter by quarter, year by year, the same way he'd once studied route schedules before winter storms. That moment reminded me of something I've seen too many times. The strongest retirees aren't necessarily the wealthiest. They're the ones who adapt. Tommy adapted, slowly, reluctantly, but completely. Months passed. The calculations became cleaner, the estimates became sharper. Withdrawal timing changed, future distributions were adjusted, and gradually he worked himself back toward the threshold. Not dramatically below it, just under it, close enough, careful enough, intentional enough. Back at the driver break room, not during a shift, not during a meeting, just a quiet afternoon, the room nearly empty, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the faint sound of buses warming outside for athletic routes, coffee stains still decorating the same long table, a route clipboard pushed off to one side, the thick manila folder resting nearby, and beside it sat something new, a handwritten page, bracket watch sheet. I'm going to direct this carefully before Tommy says another word. Look at that sheet. Not the photograph, not the calculator, the sheet. Because that's what all of this eventually became. A system, a habit, a routine, not with celebration, with acceptance, the kind earned through experience. I watched this unfold in real time, and it reminded me of a memory from years ago. A retired carpenter once told me, "The second half of life is mostly learning which things need checking." I didn't fully understand that sentence back then. I do now.
Funny thing is, seeing all of that on one piece of paper should have made me feel worse. Instead, it made me feel like I finally knew what I was dealing with. And that felt a whole lot better than not knowing.
Picture Tommy sitting at that desk, the root clipboard pushed aside, the corners of the folder worn even softer, the calculator resting next to the new worksheet. Outside, engines rumbling. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzing gently. And beside the folder lay a photograph from his final year driving. Children gathered around him, a signed poster, his wife standing beside him, smiling. A moment frozen before retirement became more complicated than either of them expected. Tommy looked at that picture for a long time, then reached for the worksheet.
I touched the photo before I picked up the calculator. Then I looked at the bracket watch sheet. And I realized something. I kept waiting for the system to become fair. It never did. So now I check these numbers every quarter exactly the way I checked my bus before every route. Not because I trust the road, because I know what's out there.
His hand rested on the photograph. A few seconds passed. Then the room went quiet again. And that's when his daughter called. Just life arriving at the right moment. He told her they were working things out, told her the Florida trip might happen later, not this season, maybe the next. There was a pause. Then she answered.
The kids will still be waiting, Dad.
And honestly, that nearly broke me. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. That's what made it powerful. The grandkids would wait, the trip would wait, life would keep moving, and Tommy would keep adapting. In Tommy's case, the review eventually helped because his retirement, lower projected income, and supporting documentation matched the requirements. That doesn't happen in every case, but it happened in his. The projections improved, the premium impact eased, the threshold was no longer being crossed. But here's the important part. The real victory wasn't the paperwork. The real victory was the habit. The system didn't become easier. Tommy became harder to surprise.
I thought retirement meant I could finally stop paying attention. Turns out I just needed a different checklist. The route changed. That's all. The job didn't. And honestly, I can live with that.
And maybe that's the lesson retirement teaches all of us. The road keeps changing, the rules change, the thresholds move, costs rise, plans shift. The people who do best aren't the ones who predict every turn. They're the ones who keep checking the map. This story shows how careful income planning helped Thomas Whitaker get out from under IRMAA threshold pressure and reduce the roughly $350 monthly Medicare surcharge he had been facing. Tommy stopped expecting the road to be fair and started reading the signs more carefully. That's a very different thing. Here's what I've learned after all these years. The people who do best usually aren't the people who expect fairness. They're the people who build habits. The biggest thing I want you to take away is that retirement still requires attention, just a different kind. I've sat across enough tables to know that small threshold mistakes can become expensive surprises. I've also seen careful planning prevent those surprises, and Tommy's story proves that. 1. Take a thick manila folder like Tommy used, and every first Monday of each quarter, sit down with it exactly the same way you checked pre-trip inspection forms before a route. Write 3 columns, projected MAGI, planned withdrawals, and Medicare impact. 2. Take the old calculator from your retirement paperwork area. Every 15th day of the month, use it to calculate how close your projected income sits to the next IRMAA threshold. Treat it like checking your daily mileage logs. 3. Take a bracket watch sheet like Tommy created, and every 3 months, update your income estimates and plan distributions. 4. Take the same tax return folder you use during annual reviews. Every January, compare last year's actual income against your projection, just like checking the attendance report before morning pickup. 5. Take a printed Medicare premium worksheet, and every quarter look for changes that could affect next year's costs. 6. Finally, take a family photo and place it beside your planning folder every quarterly review, exactly the same way you checked destination lists before starting. A route. Remember what the planning is protecting. If you're somewhere between 50 and 70 and this story hit close to home, drop "I'm in" the comments. I read them and I try to answer as many as I can. This content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, tax, or legal advice. Individual situations vary. Consult a qualified professional or your local SHIP counselor before making any decisions. Names and identifying details have been changed for privacy. Frank Harlan is a narrative composite character used to illustrate common Medicare and IRMAA situations.